Hey everyone, I'm going to do my second video. This one is all about a day event that Gavin set up to run from Daffcon, which ran out of Firestorm Games, the gaming convention. So there were lots of systems being played, and Gavin managed to get some tables so that a few of us could come together and have a good day's gaming. Gavin brought some awesome trophies and some prize support. And for those of you who don't know, Gavin does the best prize support. I haven't been to an event that offers a better set of prizes for what you get and what you do on the day, basically. So yeah, big thumbs up to Gavin at Tour Gaming for that one. So yeah, we went to Daffcon. I got in a car in the morning, went and picked up a couple of other guys, and we drove down together. It was a good laugh. Turned up ready for 4 games of Relics that were using the Relics standard tournament pack, with the kind of following exception, that the kind of mechanic that revolves around morale was basically taken out. So it was kind of no holds bar type thing. You weren't going to have people fleeing off the board in this game. It was more a kind of good old ding dong, trying to get the scenarios in place, trying to get them to score more than your opponent, basically. Before we get going, I actually won the event. Woohoo! Who'd have guessed it? I was a little bit surprised, actually. So this is kind of my run through of the game, the games that I played, who I played against. Now, if you're interested in looking at how the event played out, who played who, what points were scored, Gavin's really meticulous in how he records all of his results, and he also does really awesome write-ups on the website. I'll whack a link down somewhere if you have a look. So you can actually follow the event through. Unfortunately, you might have to look at some pictures of my ugly mush, so I'll apologise for that one in advance. So yeah, we turned up, got there nice and early. 4 games. There were 8 people in the event. So going forward, I think that with the prizes and stuff, and how awesome the day was, I think that as a community, I think it's really important to try and get to more of these events, and hopefully you will see more of you turn up to some of these and try and get them up to sort of double that number, up to 16 or even 32 would be absolutely awesome, because it is a really fun system. The day was really good. No one was funny on the day. There wasn't that person, the one who annoys everyone. You know who I mean. That tournament goer. There was good banter. Everyone had a lot of fun. Everyone kind of got on, and also there was the really good thing about this event that I noticed. Everyone was talking to each other about how they got on, what they did, what they could have done better. What their opponents could have done better. It was kind of a really good kind of learning experience, really. So yeah, going into game 1, I got drawn against a lovely chap called Michael, who plays Orknar. Boo. Now, I don't play a lot of Orknar. I don't play against Orknar very often. And for the few games, with all my family and work commitments that I do get in, not many of the players that I can play against locally have an Orknar force. So out of all the forces I could play against, they're the ones who I knew least about. So I was kind of going in a bit blind, but also Michael, I think, was quite new and hadn't played many games. So it was one of those, I think he probably knew more about my force than I knew about his, but I probably knew more about my force and how it played, just because I played more games than him. So yeah, we basically set up, and we were playing the scenario. So Tour Gaming have a scenario pack. It's worth having a look if you're getting into Relics. And it was the scenario where the table gets split into thirds, long ways across the board. So the lines are drawn from you across to your opponent, and you basically win victory points if you score more. If you score a third when the game finishes. So to score a third, to get 1 VP, so there's 3 VPs available, you have to have more points and more models than your opponent in that third, basically. And it's really important to stress that the points bit's really important. You can't just have a massive cheap unit in there, because your opponent can stick a character in there, and then the points become a draw, basically. So yeah, we set up. I'd done a previous video on a list that I'd been trying to build for a previous event, the only other event that I've played in, that revolved around 2 bombers. And since then I've been practicing a little bit and trying to figure out, because the list really revolves around how well you place those 2 guys, and whether they can buy you a turn so that you can win the scenario, basically. Yeah, the good thing about playing against Orknar is that, well, this list specifically that Michael had is unfortunately there wasn't very much shooting, so he was going to have to deal with the Orknar with the bombers the old-fashioned way, which was to either smash them in the face or just take a hit basically. Now, and unfortunately for Michael, I managed to get the bombers in about as good a place as I could, I thought, and I also managed to trigger them both off without him being able to do very much in response. And that kind of early game massive hit that wiped out his commander and all sorts of stuff really meant that the rest of the game was an uphill struggle. And Michael had actually deployed quite sensibly and had his very fast out sort of flanking units, his dogs and whatnot, move out of the way. As you should do, and bring them in. But unfortunately, because he'd moved them out the way and because I'd crippled the centre of his army, it meant that he was trying to fight basically a whole army with a very small proportion of his. So unfortunately, Michael actually lost all of his models. So in terms of VPs and stuff, I managed to score all three basically. So I was quite happy with that for a first game against an army that I never played before. But Michael was really nice, and it was quite funny getting the little Twitter tweets as the day went on about what happens when two bombers hit an army of Orknar. All that kind of stuff was quite a good laugh. So yeah. So going into the second game, I was a little bit worried actually, because the problem with the Swiss style system, although there are some exceptions, is that if you win your first game, you are almost definitely going to be playing someone else who has also won their game, especially after the first round. So I knew I was going to get pulled against someone who probably knew a lot more about the game than I did. And this was the case. I actually played Tom in the second game, who's got a lot of experience playing Relics. He played Vatir. He had two very strong lists. And yeah, so I thought, oh, blimey, I'm going to get absolutely spanked in the second game. But I thought, you know what, I'll give it a whirl. I've been practicing with my list and my two trooper blocks, and I did make a bit of a swap out and put some of the grenadiers in that were actually really good, and marksmen and the bombers. I thought I'd give it as good a game as I could to at least not embarrass myself. So yeah, I laid my stuff down. He laid his stuff down. We were playing the scenario where you have 7 shards that you get placed, one in the centre, and you place 3 each. And yeah, you basically then have these shards that explode randomly, and at the end of the game, the person who holds the most shards that haven't exploded wins the game. Basically, that's how you score a VP. So there are 3 VPs available, and I actually thought about a couple of ways I could try and play against Tom, and I thought probably the chances are if I try and kill him, he's just going to wipe me. So I thought, right, I'm just going to play the scenario. I'm not going to worry about what the Vadir do. I'm going to try and stall them as much as I can. I'm not going to necessarily try and wipe them out, or shoot them lots, or engage them in combat for actual killing purposes, but more just to see whether I can play the scenario out and cheek a bit of a win that way. And luckily it kind of worked. The bombers, I've managed to get them into place, which is quite hard against Vatir because of the way that they cast spells and do all the other funny stuff that the Vatir do, and they're also quite fast and they do all these other things. So I managed to get my bombs into good positions, and I managed to get them to detonate using one of Tom's spells, which is the first time I've done that in Relics. So they've got a spell where they put this little fiery Inferno template down, which is brilliant against Pretenders. And I managed to force one of my own bombers into his fiery Inferno so that he exploded, triggering the explosions off that would kill a few models off and actually help me really win the game. But more importantly, Tom, I don't think had played against a list like mine before, and he kind of stalled a little bit, which gave me the chance that I needed to do what I was going to do, which is, as I mentioned, just try and win the scenario. So in that time that he was trying to maneuver his stuff to not get the full effect of 2 bombers, which he managed to get out of the way of for the most part, he was only suffering a wound here or a wound there. But that extra turn, what it meant was, I thought, well, they're going to explode anyway, these shards. If I'm not holding them, then he's faster than me. The chances are he will. So I basically used that extra turn that I had to pick up shards that were quite possibly going to kill me. Now, it might seem a bit silly, but I thought, actually, I've got big units. My characters can probably take a hit at 5d6 and still survive. So I basically tried to grab as many of these shards as I could really early, mainly to try and prevent Tom from doing it. So regardless of what he did to me, he would have to kill big units, get through those big units, then pick those shards up, then kill the characters that had the shards. And it turned out that that wasn't possible. So what I'd managed to do is what would have been an almost certain defeat if we'd have carried on playing. If it had been another 3 turns, I'd got absolutely ruined probably. I managed to score 2 and Tom score 1, I believe. I'll just double check that. But yeah, I think Tom scored 1. So going out the second game, I'd won my second game, which was again a bit of a shock. But hey ho, you know, brilliant. I was going into the third game unbeaten, which was absolutely smashing. Yeah, I was really looking forward to what scenario we were going to play. So third game, which was my favourite game of the day. My opponent was great, as all my opponents were great. But what I really liked was the scenario that I played. It was the scenario where you have portals and you have these kind of weird portal creatures that come out. And what they do is they basically get pushed around the board. So they move directly away from the nearest unit. And what you've got to try and do is herd them into your units so that at the end of the game, your units are closer than your opponent's units. Now, again, I was playing against Vatir again. So far I played Orknar and Vatir twice. This is a pretty good scenario for Vatir because of their speed and their ability to do forced actions with spell casting, and you know that they've got all the tricks under the sun that you would possibly want. And all I had was numbers, really, lots of dudes. So this is where my 2 marksmen kind of really came into their own in the overall games that I played at the tournament. You know, they picked a few models off; they're a pain in the bum. But in this scenario, the bombers did what they do. They got in the way and slowed Luke down a bit. But the marksmen, what they did is, with their special advanced deployment, I managed to place them very close to the portals, which meant that when these little creatures shot out, they would automatically run directly towards my force. And I thought, you know, if I can get them to move towards me, it kind of evens the odds a little bit with regards to the speed of the Vatir against my numbers and bulky mass. So luckily, you know, Luke played a really good game. He managed to get the one guy, the one bug or creature on my right flank away from my troopers by using his really quick units, basically, which is what I was expecting to happen. But the other 2 creatures that came out, because of where the marksmen were and because I managed to get them forced back behind me, it left Luke with a lot of work to do. And unfortunately, I think he was about a turn off on the left flank, sweeping round and potentially, you know, being able to steal back a point. So yeah, I've managed to play my 3 games, win all 3. It was brilliant. I was really chuffed with that, and you know, I was actually, you know, I'd have been really happy if I'd have won half my games in the day. So winning 3 was brilliant. And then it came into the final round. Now, I actually felt sorry for Chris, who I played in the final round. And I don't normally feel sorry for Chris. I know him outside of, you know, the Relics kind of community. I've gamed with Chris and I've known him for years. So normally I just take the mick out of him and he takes the mick out of me, and we game and someone wins. But in this situation where I'd won all 3 games and he hadn't, on the top table in effect, with the scenario mailman, he knew I kind of held the perfect hand, really. I had a quite solid lead over the rest of the people that were there. So it meant that Chris would have had to have absolutely pwned me 3-0 to win the game. But he also knew that I'd played enough war games and enough relics to know that actually the chance of him being able to score a full 3 VPs against me were very slim. So then what he looked at, I think, in his head was, okay, I'm probably not going to score the maximum points, so I can't win this now. You know, I've got to try and do what I can to make sure my points are high at the end of the game. So the way that the Relics tournament system works is you have this sliding scale of points that you score depending on how many VPs you score and how many VPs your opponent scores. So the bigger the difference, the better, basically. So Chris set up. He did everything I thought he was going to do. He put a few units on one flank, but nothing substantial. And then he loaded my right flank as I was looking at the table with his mailman and a quite frankly petrifying list of giant fairies with scythes and Vistonian rock fairies. His list is brilliant, and I have no doubt if we played 100 games and the pure aim of the game was to totally annihilate your opponent, he would probably win 99 times out of 100. But in this situation, he couldn't commit his mailman because he knew that I didn't care about killing his mailman in melee, which scores me a VP, because of the points difference I had. So all I had to do was shoot him or blow him up or do anything cheeky to kill his mailman off. So I had a few tricks of doing that. So I thought, right, I'm going to try and score my point for my mailman because, if I can go 4 games unbeaten, I thought, brilliant. So I set my mailman up on the other flank, on his weaker flank, with a big unit of troopers, a company sergeant major, and I also set the 2 marksmen up on that side as well. The bombers went straight in as they normally do. Again, Chris struggled to kind of deal with them because he'd compacted the main bulk of the expensive bulk of his Vitir force in one area to protect the mailman and try and force a way through. So they did their thing. I then managed to get my mailman up the board into position, use a big unit of troopers to hold off the Vistonian, and I managed to snipe off. Can't remember what the name of the Vitir model was, Magic Caster with the force action, but managed to kill him off. So I managed to sneak my mailman off the board before he could do anything about it, just by locking him up, basically. And then my marksman had probably the most important job to do that game as well, which was basically kill the little bloody fairy things that you can arc spells through. They're horrible. And I was really concerned about them because basically one of those and a fireball, my mailman's dead. And equally, a couple of fireballs threw a couple of those little bad boys into my lines. And, the Britannians don't do too well with fire. So, you can make your own mind up on what would happen there. So my marksman's job that game was not to kill expensive models, not to kill commander models, but to kill the little elf spawn things. And, I didn't want to kill his 2 wound models because they would spawn more elf spawn that could be used to cast spells against me. And Chris had 3 very powerful magic casters that were very good in combat as well. So, yeah, I felt sorry for him a little bit because he kind of knew he was hamstrung a little bit from the beginning. And, yeah, I managed to get my mailman off scoring 1 point, and Chris decided to err on the side of caution at that point and not go all in and kind of keep his mailman out the way and just kind of stall for end of game at a 1-0. So that was the end of the event. I'd won all 4 games, and it was fantastic. So I won first place. The prizes that Gavin gives, as I mentioned at the beginning, were amazing. So I won 12 picks of anything that I liked off the Tour Gaming website. So that's units. The only exception was you could only have 1 starter box, which I think is fair cop because there's a lot of stuff in those starters. And then as the award ceremony was going on, the first thing he announced was Best Painted, and I managed to win that one as well, which was, I wouldn't have minded if he'd have given that to someone else, to be honest with you, but he gave me Best Painted based on the Britannian force that I had. Again, there'll be some pictures on here you can probably see, along with all the tournament pictures that should have been scrolling. So that gave me another 6 picks. So between the event and now, I've been scratching my head deciding what 16 units I would like from the Relics website, which is a really good head-scratching kind of experience. Anything that is to do with gaming and is free and I get to pick is smashing. So yeah, just another big shout out there for the prize support. And if Gavin is running anything in the area, just or to be honest with you, based on that, just drive anywhere. I mean, I drove about an hour and a half to get to that event, but to be brutally honest, if you had another event somewhere else, I'd probably drive 2 or 3 hours to get to it if I had to. Maybe 3 hours would be an overnight stay, but maybe 2 hours. I'd probably, with a young family, I'd probably go and play because I had a fantastic time. Everyone was great. Since then, I've also been speaking to Gavin about how people played, what they did. I've had a look at the statistics that with 8 players don't really add up that much. But the one statistic about the Bombers that I think shows the power of the Bombers if you use them properly, and also I'm going to get to how you deal with the Bombers in a minute, is that I lost a surprisingly low amount of Britannia models. So before I played this list, I'd win games every now and again, but a lot of my army would be brutally destroyed because they're defense 0, they're pretty crap, and they would just get slaughtered, which was kind of what they're designed to do. Now, that extra turn and the scenarios that I was going for meant that my opponent couldn't put their full force into action because they were so worried for the turn or two that the bombers would basically nuke out the core of their army. So now this, I think, is actually why I managed to sneak in the 4 wins, if I'm being brutally honest. And I think, looking back with this bit of advice, I think the players that played me would have played totally differently. In that the bombers, although they do quite a good damage output, when you look at it on a unit of 6 models, it's not that scary, especially when I'm investing such a large amount of points in 2 models that are basically going to be dead every game. So about 10% of my force dies by turn 2 because I make it. So I think what people needed to do is worry a little less about moving away from the bombers and just take it on the chin that some of their units were going to get caught, and just move past them and carry on as though, not as though they weren't there, because you need to commit to kill them, because if I kill them, then I choose where they get destroyed. So you would basically pick a unit that was your sacrificial unit, or sacrificial single model. He was going to get hit with a couple of 66 damage rolls, probably die, but what you wanted to do is make sure as many of your units were still engaging the rest of my army, and keep and only take 46 damage rolls, for instance, if necessary. So, but I think a lot of people kind of edged away backwards, and what that gave me was that extra time to kind of win on scenario, as opposed to win by massacring huge amounts of my opponent's army. So yeah, I think I know that everyone was saying, oh, the bombers are just so scary, blah blah blah. But I actually think when you look at them and the damage they do and the output of what they do, actually, if you kind of ignore them but allocate a sacrificial unit that's going to deal with them, points-wise, your points trade isn't that bad. And actually, as long as all your characters aren't getting hit with 2 lots of 66 damage, they'll survive, and you'll probably give me as much trouble as if the bombers weren't there in the first place. Maybe you'll be a model or 2 less effective. Even if you're 4 models less effective, it doesn't really matter, because the rest of my army is defense rubbish and not particularly quick, unless they have that extra turn. So I think that's a bit of advice there on dealing with them, is that I know that I'm just starting to do a right end or rid end army, and I'm thinking about how I would deal if I played against me, and that's kind of the way I think I'd look at it, is that I can give you a unit of peasants that you're not going to be able to disengage from. You can kill a unit of peasants, or hell, a unit of 3 knights for all I care. The rest of my stuff is going to be piling forwards and trying to get into position to win the game on scenario, and also deal a lot more damage than what I suffered in those 4 games. So yeah, bombers are good, but I don't think that they are. I don't think they're broken, and I don't think they're overly cheesy. So yeah, that was my thought on the bombers. Other bits that I think that really need to be mentioned about the events, and we were all talking about different ways of playing and stuff. Basically, when you play at these events with these sanction packs and you're playing these scenarios, don't take your eye off the scenario. And I think that's another reason why I won all 4 games, is that I play a lot of the games that I do play, the game systems I do play, all revolve around scenario. Not about nuking your opponent or tabling them or whatever. It's all about scenario. So when you play those type of games, you train your mind to not worry about only having 1 model left at the end of the game, unless that's a condition of winning the game. But to worry about scoring the points you need to score to beat your opponent. And that's all I concentrated on. I literally wasn't overly bothered about killing any of my opponent's models. Although in the first game I did, it was just by the luck of the bombers going off, really, more than anything, when they did. Is to just play scenario, regardless of what you're thinking about. I really want to crush his commander. I really want to, that unit that's been plaguing me the whole game, I've got to destroy them with my best unit. That won't win you the games. In most of my games, my opponent, if the game would have been allowed to continue for 3 more turns, I'd have been dead. So yeah, when you go to these events, all of the factions have their different strengths and weaknesses, but play the scenario to the best of your ability, and I think that's the main focus. And I think that, I spoke to Gavin on Messenger about what I was going to do in this video. That is the one thing I think that needs to be got across in these tournaments: scenario, scenario, scenario. Nothing else really matters. So yeah, that's the end really of the event. I'm going to put a link up to the Tour Gaming website, as I always do. I'm going to put a link to the page with the really cool breakdown of the stats and responses from the games. You can have a look at the scoring. So yeah, and all I can say is, if any of you get a chance to go to a Relics event, whether it's 4 people or 10 people or however many people are going, go and have a good time. It was a good laugh. There were no arguments. There was lots of banter. I had a great cracking time with a load of friends, both old and new friends that I've made. So yeah, get playing some Relics. Let us know how you get on. Put pictures up. Do your own video in response of how you deal with bombers. Do whatever you like, but play some games and give it a whirl. I know that there's a new release coming out of Relics. So what better time to dust off those models if you've got them, or perhaps go and buy a set of models. It's relatively inexpensive to get into, and start playing with the second edition, and feedback to Gavin what you think of the new system, and I think he's really open to building a game system that everyone really enjoys. So happy gaming, and woohoo! I won my first Relics event. I'll catch you soon. Cheers. Bye.